Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joey, here from is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And before we get back into the Beyond the Black River, we decided we'd take a look at this because this popped up into my feed. Well, actually, another video did, and but that's about an hour long, and we're gonna do a reaction video to that. I'm not gonna watch it until we do, but I figured this would be shorter and easier to edit and whatnot because the longer video, we're going to have to spend more time. That'll probably be like 2-3 hours of viewing. So, we wait till a day we have the time for that. So until then, we're just going to go with how Conan the Barbarian became king. That, I think, I was going to say there should be a captain in there, but wrong character. Oh wait, king is better than captain. I'm joking. Oh man, I'm just trolling at this point. Oh, first off, just remembered. Oh, bloody hell. I always forget because I don't really watch YouTube on higher settings because I don't see the need. To be honest, I'm not
in our last video.
To be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of kings and generals because they often make mistakes with their history. They got some things right. They got some great videos, but other times I find they're just... And when they make a mistake, they double down on it. They don't actually say, well, we actually made a mistake. Whereas Flashpoint History, for example, will actually say, I got this wrong, guys. Here's the actual historic thing. It's the difference between a casual of sorts and an actual historian.
I dropped off of Kings and Generals a while back.
Yeah, I myself make mistakes with history. No, I'll admit it. But the difference is, like, I'll also say my professors sometimes made mistakes. But what they also ended up tending to do was, oh, we're sorry, we made a mistake. Or, I don't actually know that. My specialty is in the history of the British prayer book. Well, I actually had a professor like that. That's what he said. My focus is not in ancient Roman civil wars. Sorry, I made a mistake on the date Caesar beat Vercingetorix. My bad. The actual date is this. Thank you to this. I think it was like Cecilia or something was the student's name. I can't remember. It's been like 12 years. It's like, thank you for correcting me. Now let's move on. Like, none of them ever doubled down. So this doubling down thing, I don't really like.
Nice
we witnessed Conan.
Yeah, at least he's not shirtless. I don't understand why others always portray him shirtless. So kudos to Kings and Generals for that.
Of Camaria's first taste of leadership in
Samaria.
In the service of Corella, beating back the hordes of the undead sorcerer Thugra Khotan. The decades to follow would see him grow further into the role of a leader, inspiring loyalty and terror across the breadth of the world. He had fought against his former master and rival, Yezdegerd of Turin, leading the Kazaki Free Companions of the Steppes as their hetman. He had raided far-off Vendia ahead of the Afghuli tribesmen, forged brigands into an army to overthrow the usurper queen of Kauran, and entered into legend as the fearsome pirate lord known as Amra, the Lion of the Black Coast. But his greatest...
That's from Hour of the Dragon, which we're about to get to that chapter soon in Dragon Hour.
Test and his greatest conquest lay ahead of him in the mightiest kingdom of the Hyborian Age, Aquilonia, an old and proud empire laid low by the tyranny of its mad king, Numedides.
Now, we don't recommend trying to achieve all these feats yourself, and instead use a shortcut to receiving a high title by
his mastery of the arcane arts not dulling his courtly talents as a politician and schemer. Conan and Numedides had history already, and had not always been foes. Though in his youth, Conan had first bloodied himself in battle against Aquilonians, part of the wild horde that overran Fort Venarium on Aquilonia's frontier with Cimmeria, in more recent years he had served in Numidides' army, rising to become a renowned general for his victories fighting the Picts at the Thunder River and Velitrium. His rise would come...
We're currently reading that story, I think, which is Beyond the Black River, so...
If you ask me, he could probably slow down a bit, because a lot of these names might be unfamiliar to many.
Yeah, we recognize them because we've been reading the stories.
Yeah, but it's probably best that he slows down a little.
Yeah.
With an even more sudden fall, however, when the paranoid Numidides, fearful of the mighty Outlander's popularity, turned on his general and forced Conan to flee into exile to avoid execution, departing Aquilonia to the wilderness of the Picts he had so recently warred against. However, Conan's exile would not be a long one. In the depths of the Pictish wilderness, he made two surprising discoveries. First, the hidden treasure cave of the famed pirate Trenikos, whose buried wealth dwarfed the treasuries of kingdoms, and second, a remote wooden fortress built by another exile, the Zingaran Count Corzetta. Tensions grew higher with the arrival of two rival pirate captains, Strombani and Black Sarono. Though Corzetta had in truth come to the wilderness fleeing the wrath of the wizard Thothamon, whom he had once cheated out of payment for a dark bargain, both pirates...
Not a wise idea given Thothamon's personality.
Yeah.
And his brilliance and cruelty. Not a wise idea.
Were convinced the Count had come seeking the treasure of Trenikos. However, attacks from Picts and the reveal of Conan's knowledge of the treasure's location eventually drove the four into an uneasy rogues alliance. After schemes and betrayals from all parties, the enterprise nearly came to naught with the fall of Corzetta's fortress to Picts and the death of Corzetta and both captains. But fortune smiled on Conan in the form of Count Trocero of Poitain, a friend and ally of Conan's who had followed the divination.
Yeah, Trocero de Poitain is honestly the most trustworthy of the counts of Aquilonia.
Of the Mitran priest Dexathius to find the exiled barbarian general and recruit him for a rebellion to overthrow Numidides. With the treasure of Trenikos to bankroll their insurrection, Conan and his unexpected rescuers left the Pictish wilderness by war galley to Messentia, capital of Argos, there to plot the toppling of a despot. Messentia would provide a staging ground for the raising of Conan and Trocero's mercenary army. King Milo of Argos was an old friend of Count Trocero's, and no friend of Numidides. During the reign of the mad tyrant's uncle and predecessor, large swaths of land along the Alamein River had been seized from Argos by Aquilonia, and the grudges ran deep between Argos and its more powerful, domineering neighbour. Selling the vast wealth of Trenikos, Conan and Trocero soon raised over 10,000 warriors, camping and drilling outside Messentia as even more Aquilonian deserters, exiles and fortune seekers flocked to the returned general's banner. But among the thousands of eager and loyal soldiers, two newcomers had come to Conan's camp with treachery in their hearts. First was Quesado, a Zingaran spy in the employ of Thalandra Thu, who played the role of a drunken layabout sellsword in order to infiltrate Conan's camp. The second was Alcina, Thu's apprentice and catspaw, who posed as a Messantian dancing girl and became Conan's mistress after he overheard Quesado telling tales of her beauty.
Yeah, this part is from Conan the Liberator. Terrible novel. So this part of the story, yeah, it portrays Conan as really dumb. Where, yeah, it's better if it's non-canon. Blot it from your memories, folks.
When Conan's forces finally left Messentia on the road to Tarantia, it was with these two unseen enemies in their midst, informing the foe of their movements. Standing between Conan's army and Aquilonia was the Border Legion under General Procas, an experienced and skilled commander, but one long out of favour in court and a target of Thalandra's machinations. Based on the Aquilonian side of the Alamein River in Trocero's native Poitain, they could control the three safe fords and make any crossing difficult, despite Conan having the larger army. The rebels had one major advantage. Poitain was one of the provinces most hostile to King Numidides, and partisans in the province were preparing to raise it in revolt, promising to send a bloodied arrow to Conan as a signal when the revolt was ready. However, for such an uprising to have any meaning, Conan's army would first have to make the dangerous crossing of the Alamein. Conan's advance was a hurried one. Pressured by the growing displeasure of King Milo at the large foreign army at his borders, and hoping to march on Tarantia before harvest season brought potential recruits back to their fields, Conan would have no choice but to attempt to force a crossing, splitting his army into 3 and preparing to march as soon as the signal from Trochero's partisans arrived. In the central, largest river crossing, a small force under Trochero's right-hand man, Prospero, would camp and threaten to cross, with extra tents and horses to feign a much larger number. With the Aquilonians hopefully taking this for the main army and focusing their defense in the center, Trochero and Conan would cross at the eastern and western crossings with the bulk of the army, falling on Procas in a pincer movement. But as sound as the plan was, it would be undone by Alcina's spying. Overhearing Conan and Trochero's plan as she feigned sleep in the general's tent, the plan and the awaited signal were transmitted by magic to Thalandra Thu, and from Thu on to Procas. The following day, a bloodied arrow was indeed delivered to Conan's camp, but as a ruse by Procas, luring Conan into his trap before their allies could muster. The resulting
Now, this really, really dumb plan, because it is a dumb plan, rather than trying to kill pincer some of the enemies after they cross the river, because, crossing a river isn't easy. Instead Conan and Trochero are going to cross the river. So, yeah, themselves, which that's where I'm saying it's a stupid plan. But I know Kings and Generals is trying to defend the lore here, but the problem with Conan the Liberator, the book, is that it's so garbage. There's no defense. The way it portrays Conan is as a really, really, really stupid guy. And he never actually beats Procas. But the reality is that if Howard had been writing this story, Procas would have been beaten by Conan, and likely Alcina would have been exposed as a spy, and Conan would have found out and figured it out. There's also and he would not have insisted on crossing the river. Howard shows how crossing the river is not always a good idea for armies in Hour of the Dragon, in the 2nd chapter, when Valanus pushes the army forward across the river, which slows them down and waterlogs some of the army, with Conan objecting to this plan, showing that Conan is aware that this is not a good idea. So this is where, like I said, I'm not going to criticize Kings and Generals too much here. They're trying not to criticize the lore, and they're trying not to criticize idiots like El Sprague de Camp, but the reality is this was a very, very poorly written storyline.
And Conan would not risk his plans being overheard by a mistress in the next tent over.
Well, she was outside his tent. She had snuck over. But I don't think... he's been spied upon and his plans exposed before, but the idea of the Conan short stories is that he's learning from every adventure. So he would have already learned not to really trust her. And the other thing with Conan is he's careful with who he takes to his bed. In Conan the Liberator, he is not. But as we discussed, that's not really Conan. That's, I don't know, some idiot masquerading as Conan.
Because if...
battle would be nothing
this plan, she reports it, he decided to set up a whole different plan.
Well, no, I don't... Okay, that's if he knows she overheard, Dan. I'm going with...
If he didn't.
But even then, he wouldn't... The thing is, he wouldn't trust her and take her to bed so easily. But a portion of the book, he's just hungering for a woman, any woman, which is just... I've read the book. It's horrid. Watch our reviews of it. But the thing is, I could actually say it's in the top 10 worst books I've ever read in my life. The thing is, though, yeah, he might set up a dummy plan like that to... Well, the thing is, Conan might actually tell one person, here's the plan, tell another, here's the plan, tell another, here's the plan. And then reveal, when he knows how the enemy is acting, he's going to go, oh, now I know who the traitor is. You know what I mean? They did that in Game of Thrones with the Tyrion Lannister character. Conan is the sort to do that sort of ploy. But... it's just...
short of a disaster for the rebels under Conan. their charge to cut bloody trails in the disorganized mass of rebels in the river. Unable to maintain the discipline of his panicked troops, Conan soon fled with what survivors he could muster, with a downpour of heavy rain come evening, hiding both him and the similarly defeated Trocero from the Aquilonian cavalry hunting survivors across the river. While the death toll was significant, the blow to morale the disaster inflicted was far worse, with most of the survivors simply deserting into the forest in hopes of reaching safety. The remainder of the scattered host slowly regrouping after the disaster into a force barely stronger than 1,500, which withdrew back through the Saxula Pass to the plain of Palos. Conan's misfortune would only grow in the aftermath. Informed of the battle's outcome by Alcina, Thalandra Thu decided to rid himself of both Conan and his rival Procas, now that the commander was no longer needed to keep the rebels at bay. On her master's orders, Alcina poisoned Conan with the deadly powder of the Purple Lotus, leaving him for dead and departing the rebel camp. Thu, meanwhile, had Numidic.
It would not have happened under Howard's pen. The thing is, the scene itself, it doesn't make any sense when it comes time to the poisoning. But anyways, we're not going to get into that. We're just going to skip on ahead because, yeah, what's the point?
Been prepared to deliver. A few hours later, a second force appeared to tip the scales. The intact rearguard from Trocero's force, which had escaped the disaster under the leadership of Baron Groda and numbered another 1,500 to double Conan's army. Now outnumbered, Procas signalled his army to withdraw, hoping the sudden imbalance in numbers would forestall Numidides' anger. Seeing his foe retreating, Conan hoped to pursue them through the pass, dealing what damage they could while they filed through the passes and across the river.
Unfortunately, the Argosian horsemen under Prince Cassio were under orders to fight for the Aquilonians only if they attempted to push further into Argos, and would not take the offensive against them with the rebels, despite Cassio's sympathy for Conan's cause. But here, Conan's experience in Turan would serve him well. Remembering the mounted archers that formed the core of that Eastern Kingdom's army, Conan asked Cassio to lend him 500 horses. After all, the king's order bound only the soldiers, not their mounts. What horses the rebel army had left were underfed and exhausted, but with 500 strong Argosian mounts, Conan could mount his Basonian archers to harry the retreating Aquilonians. Though his men were unable to fire from horseback, they waged an effective guerrilla offensive over the following days, riding in small groups into longbow range of the enemy, dismounting to fire, and vanishing like smoke in the face of resistance. On his way back through the Saxula Pass, Procas's army was further damaged by an avalanche of boulders prepared by Conan's scouts. Despite his skill as a soldier, the Aquilonian general lacked Conan's mastery of irregular warfare, won through years of tribal warfare and piracy. And while the attrition meant little to the Border Legion's overall numbers, it caused a rapid deterioration of their morale. Finally crossing back over the Alamein after 3 days of harassment, volleys from 200 of Conan's archers gave the Aquilonians a taste of what the rebels had suffered at their hands, and Procas himself was left wounded and unable to travel by an arrow in his leg. Beaten and humiliated, the Border Legion made camp on the Alamein's north bank to turn back any attempts at a second crossing. Despite the losses inflicted by Conan's hit-and-run attacks, the numbers were still more favourable for the Border Legion than they had been in the rebels' first crossing, and the liberation of Aquilonia might well have ended here in stalemate, if not.
Yeah, but the way the book portrays it is, yes, Conan seizes a good number of victories over. Like, he uses irregular warfare or Fabian tactics like this to excellent effect, but then he bungles it up at the last minute to an extent. It's just, you really have to read the book. It's just, it's horrendous. But yeah, like, but the war was about to swing towards Procas when, oops, Thalandra Thu kills him.
For the misplaced plotting of Thalandra Thu. With Quasado and Alcina now both gone from the rebel camp, neither they nor the wizard they served was aware Conan had survived the poisoning. Thinking the rebel army was leaderless and no longer a threat, Thu decided it was now safe to eliminate his rival Procas, sending Alcina as his assassin. claiming to bear a message from the mage.
Now, the assassination attempt makes no sense.
She secured a private meeting in the general's tent, only to mortally injure him with a poisoned dagger. The old warrior would sell his life dearly in his last moments though, with the amulet used to communicate with her master being torn free in the struggle and left behind in Alcina's hurry to flee the camp.
Get this, he was wearing his hauberk, so she could not have actually stabbed him if one were to apply logic. Yeah. I'm glad they don't mention that part because, well, you gotta clean up this. Like, somebody's gotta clean up after Decon and his incompetence. So, as a writer, like, I'm glad Kings and Generals are trying to clean it up because, like, you gotta try. Because to present how some of his mistakes, it is embarrassing.
In the morning, the discovery of Procas's death, declared a suicide by his replacement, Count Ascalante, an inexperienced and power-hungry noble under Thalandra Thu's sway, caused the Border Legion's already flagging morale to plummet, with the unlikeliness of the suicide claim spurring distrust and suspicion towards their new leadership. Thus, while made up of some of the most experienced soldiers in Aquilonia, the Border Legion would be little prepared for what would come next. As mentioned previously, Poitain had been on the brink of revolt when Conan's army of liberation had first arrived, but the disaster at the Alamein and the rebel withdrawal to the plains of Argos had left the population too afraid of Numidides' harsh reprisals to turn on the crown. But now, with Conan again camped across the river, Procas dead, and the Border Legion licking its wounds, Trocero's propagandists set the planning of months into motion. Just a few nights after Procas's death, the city of Calario erupted in a well-planned rebellion, Poitanians killing guards at their posts, looting the armory, and hanging the Aquilonian governor and tax collector. Following this, the victorious rebels made their way swiftly south, reaching the Alamein before word of the successful insurrection. With fog shrouding the early morning darkness and the loss of Procas's skilled leadership, the Aquilonians were caught off guard by the surprise attack from friendly territory, with Conan's army taking advantage of the fog and the distraction to launch their own attack, and Ascalante deserting at the first sign of defeat. The skilled and experienced Border Legion rapidly lost its discipline and disintegrated, some fighting in a confusing darkened melee, while far more threw down their weapons in surrender. Conan's campaign at the Alamein, despite its disastrous beginning,
Which, just one fun fact, Alamein. You know what? That's a bit of a nod to the Alamo. So I do like that from Conan the Liberator. Never forget the Alamo. Them Texans.
beginnings would end as a triumph. In the aftermath of the victory, the barbarian warrior's renown and popularity as a former general and war hero allowed him to sway many from the Border Legion to join his cause, including Ascalante's former second-in-command, the self-serving but skilled Baron Grommel. And on his arrival in Calario, new recruits and allies flocked to his lion standard, with the northern barons pledging their allegiance and men of Poitain volunteering to join his ranks in numbers greater than could be armed or equipped. Though this was only the first step on his long road to Tarantia, it would surprisingly be the last major battle won through conventional force of arms, despite the larger Aquilonian armies still standing in his path. At the Brazilian forest, both armies would trust in sorcery to win the day. Conan would see victory here, his keen senses allowing him to save his army from Thalandra Thu's magical landslide trap, while the satyrs of the forest, promised peace and friendship by Conan, who had saved some of their number being hunted for Thu's rituals, would use their pipes to cast madness over the encamped Aquilonians. And following this magical victory, it would be Conan's sword arm alone that won him Tarantia and its ruby throne. Though 25,000 Aquilonians under Count Ulrich stood poised to drive the rebels from the capital, turncoats among the Black Dragons, the elite royal guard of Aquilonia, who in recent years had seen and suffered through the madness of Numidides more closely than any, smuggled Conan, the priest Dexathius, and some of his loyal men within the near unguarded palace itself. Here, protected from the unprepared Thu's magic by Dexathius, the wanderer from Cimmeria slew the newly self-proclaimed deity Numidides and drove Thalander Thu to flight, being proclaimed King Conan and ending the civil war before the two armies could meet in pitched battle. In the years to follow, Conan would prove himself one of the greatest monarchs of the Hyborian Age, but...
No, that's not the lore. Not one of the greatest. The greatest. So right there, I think that's a bit of a slight to Conan. I'm just saying, and an inadvertent one on Kings and Generals parts. They didn't. I don't think they intended it as a slight, but the idea of the lore is that he's the greatest king of the Hyborian Age, with his son King Khan probably not terribly far behind him. Conan is, yeah, he's supposed to basically be the best. He's a Charlemagne, an Augustus Caesar type figure who he's essentially the archetype of the king in a way, like the king archetype. So he's basically Howard's Aragorn. So you kind of have to look at him as he is the best in Aquilonian history, just as Aragorn's probably the best in Gondor and Arnor's history. And the idea is mythological and whatnot, and to an extent psychological. Like, when I say psychological, I mean the Jungian, Freudian idea here. So, yeah.
Rulership would bring many new challenges for the barbarian swordsman, and more battles still lay ahead.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Established.
Yeah, established title, from what I hear, is a scam. So, okay. But, anyways, if I had to rate this video, I'd probably... Now, let's not even rate it. Like, I don't think that'd be pretty respectful.
And it wouldn't be fair to Kings and Generals, because
they did what they could with what was probably one of the worst Conan stories. So, you know, like, there's only so much you could polish a turd. That said, the visuals were nice. They told it pretty well. So, yeah, the only thing is, they made one mistake, I think. Numidides is strangled over the throne of Aquilonia. He's not pulled towards Conan and stabbed, or has his head chopped off as he's still pretty much breathing. No, he's strangled over the throne. It's established in Hour of the Dragon. But, anyways, tell us what you all think of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more of this sort of content, let us know in the comment section. And don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Conan taking down his enemies.